Good morning. Thank you for coming out this morning. My name is Greg Dale. I'm with a firm called McBride Dale Clarion. We have been serving as the facilitator of this process, and I'll tell you more about what that's all about here in just a minute. So first item on our agenda is welcome. I see the Mayor Anderson just walked in. Did you want to say hi to everybody or give a welcome? You've typically done that welcoming. All right. So you can see the agenda up here. Let me tell you what we're going to try to accomplish here this morning, and then I do want to do another quick round of interviews. We have some new faces in the room. Doesn't hurt to refresh. So we're just going to, since we do have some new faces, we are going to give a refresher. It's been a while since we've met. We're gonna be kind of deliberate and going through the steps that we've been following. And frankly, as I put this together, I was just reminded at how much we have accomplished. We are going to then talk about the status of the actual growth areas map. There is one small area on which there's not yet consensus. I'll describe that to you, and perhaps we can get an update on that. And then we're going to have an update on some pending legislation that is very uncertain at this point, but is very directly on point with what we're doing here. And then talk about what those next steps are. So with that, let's just again do a quick round of introductions, name and who you're affiliated with, what your position is, and so forth.
Jason Golden, Williamson County Schools.
Judy Herbert, 2nd District County Commissioner.
Kel McDowell, Williamson Inc.
Michael Wood, I'm the Planning Director for Thompson Station.
Andrew Mills, Town Attorney for Thompson Station.
Brian Stover, Mayor, Thompson Station.
Joe Horn, Community Development Director, Williamson County.
Michael Sullivan, City of Fairview.
Bob Lehman, City of Brentwood, Planning Director.
Kurt Badnauer, City Manager, Brentwood.
Doug Barber, Middle Tennessee Electric.
Emily Wright, Planning Director, City of Franklin.
Andrew Orr, City of Franklin.
Eric Stuckey, Franklin City Administrator.
Shauna Billingsley, City of Franklin City.
John Schroer, I was appointed. I was an alderman and they asked me to be on this committee. And I used to I'm fully retired.
And yet here you are.
Vernon Girth, Assistant City Administrator, City of Franklin.
Good morning, Jim Hagman, Mayor, Spring Hill.
Robert Graham, Soil College Manager.
Pete Hughes, City of Spring Hill.
Kim Caskey, City of Spring Hill, City Administrator.
Victor Lake, Town of Nolensville Manager. Chaz Warden, County Commissioner, 9th District.
Jeff Mosley.
Same thing that happened last time. Is it this one?
No, it's not.
Okay.
Who are you anyway?
Roger Anderson, County Mayor.
I'm Christy Ransom. I'm the County Attorney for Planning and Environment.
Mike Madison, Planning Director of Williamson County.
All right. So let me jump into doing a refresher course here. So first of all, I want to start back with the actual kind of thing that we started with, the mission that we started with very early on. And that is to update the growth boundaries. And that's both the urban growth boundaries and the planned growth areas in the county. You may recall that was an idea that came out of the county's comprehensive plan. Mayor Anderson then talked to all the other mayors, and ultimately you all agreed that we needed to do that. But the other thing that we said all along is that this is or should be about more than just where the boundaries are. It's about trying to do the hard work to come up with the policies, agreements, and so forth to make the boundaries work more efficiently, or as efficiently as they can, and ultimately to expect that as part of this process, we would be thinking not just about the lines on the map, but the agreements, intergovernmental agreements, memorandum of understanding, whatever those mechanisms end up being to try to deal with some of those issues. And we're going to talk about that here in just a few more minutes and what that started with. So then you all established this leadership structure. You are an advisory group. I think everyone understands you're an advisory group. I think you also understand that we all hope that this goes well enough so that you all agree that you all, meaning all the communities, all the municipalities in the county, agree that we want to embark on the formal version of that process, and there would be the creation of something called a coordinating committee. Perhaps most, if not all of you, are on the advisory committee, end up being on that. That's a question to be answered later. The planners group, which is exactly what it sounds like, it's the planners representing your municipalities in the county that have been working to do really the heavy lifting of the analysis that results in the maps that you see. We're going to tell you more about that. That group has met, you've met, I think, 6 or 7 times. That group has probably met at least that many times in between meetings. Those have been Zoom meetings, but really a very productive process, a very productive collaboration that I'll tell you more about. Then there's the technical advisors, which are essentially what they sound like. They're the public works, the highways, the transportation folks, the utility folks that were consulted by the planning group along the way. And then my role as facilitator of this. So to date, I think we've accomplished a lot. I'll be talking in just a minute about the guiding principles. I think the very first meeting of this group, someone suggested, hey, can we kind of put in writing a little bit more about what we're trying to accomplish here and what's guiding us in this process? So we created guiding principles that I'll summarize here in just a minute to refresh your memory. But that was a good kind of compass for the process very early on. The second bullet you see there, the growth boundaries, that was the heavy lifting of the planners group. The planners group was kind of the coordinating mechanism of that, but each of your staffs have worked really hard, and there's some pretty intense analysis behind this that will be part of the ultimate plan. 20-year boundaries, but this consistent uniform analysis. So you should understand that in your communities to create the maps, it was more than just people sitting around a table looking at, hey, where do we want to draw these boundaries? There was a lot of background research and analysis, and kind of driven by population projections and thinking about population growth and how that translates into housing needed to serve it, and jobs and services and so forth, which was really the core piece that helped to determine where those growth boundaries, what the extent of those growth boundaries should be. A lot of intensive land use analysis, capacity analysis, a lot of consideration about the ability of your communities to provide public services and facility and infrastructure to those areas. A consideration of all of that within the context of what we call fiscal sustainability, which is just what it sounds like, and that is that the fiscal health of your communities, tax revenues versus costs, and the ability to provide those services in a fiscally responsible way, all went into those maps, and we're going to show you those maps again here in just a minute. Each of the communities also did some version of public engagement. I know many communities had at least one, if not multiple, public outreach sessions, efforts as part of this process. And I believe all of your elected officials, all of the councils, commissions, and so forth were consulted in this process. Along the way, we had a symposium literally right across the parking lot here, where we brought speakers in from 3 different regions who had experienced and gone through similar kinds of processes. And I think that was really helpful to learn about that. Beaufort County, South Carolina, Wake County, North Carolina, and the Chattanooga region here in Tennessee. I think it was just really helpful for people to understand the value, not just the value of what we're doing, but some of the things that followed up from that. And one of the things in particular we'll be talking about as a potential long-term series of next steps, I think was inspired pretty directly by Beaufort County. So that was worth doing. Then we have the growth maps we're going to show you here in just a second. And then we also developed what we called the implementation strategy, goals and strategies. So I'm going to walk you through the guiding principles first, and then I'm going to walk you through those goals and strategies, because the goals and strategies in particular, which build on all of this, are really important in terms of where we go from here. So there's 2 slides here of these. Some of them are kind of straightforward, self-evident. So one of the things we just put out there was we all agree we're working together to revise these boundaries. We all agree that that's a cooperative process that we're engaged in. We agree that it's a 20-year look into the future. With this, that's part of the statute, but it's important, and that comes into play when we start talking about the implementation strategies and particularly what happens in the interim during that period of now to 20 years. I'll describe more about that. Is all about the growth forecast we talked about. We specifically mentioned the University of Tennessee because the statute requires that communities consider those, which all of your communities did, as supplemented by your own growth forecasts. Public facilities and fiscal sustainability, we've already talked about that. Regional form, that's kind of an interesting one. That's kind of a planner's term. The statute actually uses the language coming up with boundaries that are reasonably compact yet sufficiently large. That's kind of the buzzword in the statute. And the intent there is to preserve a regional form, meaning cities, urban, suburban, rural should be distinct areas. They shouldn't just be all bled together. And you all know all the horror stories in other parts of the country, around Atlanta, for example, where it's all just a sprawled series of stuff that's not efficient to serve. So that regional form was an important point. Resource protection was, again, just stating that was going to be a part of the thought process. Local autonomy, that was kind of something that people were a little questionable about early in the process, and we just wanted to say, look, none of this is going to impact your local autonomy. None of this is going to impact your ability to plan and zone within your communities and as part of that growth process. Building on local planning, I think that was an important concept, that we're not starting fresh from this. You all have community plans, you all have comprehensive plans, land use plans. You've already done a lot of this work in terms of growth forecast, and that the idea is that we're going to build on those. And Thompson Station, I think, is an interesting example, because during this process, you've been updating your comprehensive plan that actually resulted in some feedback on some of the maps that's been going on with this. And then again, the idea of intergovernmental agreements, and I'm using that term generically, not with capital letters, but this idea that there is an intent to follow up on this with some ways to deal with interim policies. And let me tell you more about what I mean by that. So these are the goals and strategies, or what we've been calling the implementation piece of this. So there's a couple things here. The first one is exactly related to that interim policies, is ensure that the system functions as optimally as possible. So the concept is this, and that is those boundaries, those 20-year boundaries, obviously mean that it's the area in which it would take 20 years to grow. So that means that some of those areas might continue to be in the county, even though they're in a growth boundary for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And yet we also know that within those areas, people own land. And while we might like to say in a perfect world, nothing happens with that land until the cities are ready to grow into it, to annex with the demonstration of the ability to provide public services and all that kind of thing that you understand, in cooperation with property owners. We still have this question of what happens while it's in the county in the interim. If somebody is a property owner, is ready because of life issues or whatever it would be to sell and want to develop their property, but maybe the cities are saying, we're not ready for it. We're not contiguous to it. We can't get services there, right? We're doing this in an orderly fashion, and it's going to take time to get there. So the question is, what happens in the interim? How does the county zone it, right? What is it zone? What are policies for public facilities? What are policies for alternative wastewater systems, which the municipalities probably don't want in their as part of their ability to provide those services. So, that's been one of the real key questions. And basically what this is simply saying, that we're agreeing that as part of a follow-up to this initial growth plan, that those kinds of things would need to be addressed. Related to that is the possibility that there's a need to go back to the state legislature with requests for authority that's just specific to Williamson County. Again, what that means, we don't know yet. Could be something related to annexation. The point being that to make this work, we want to keep on the table the possibility that we might need special legislation to help make that work. So it's just a consideration of that. The other one that I think is really important, it's a policy statement, but it's a policy statement that would be, as part of engaging in this planning process, the municipalities agreed not to annex outside the growth boundaries. And it's kind of self-evident. I mean, why would you want to agree to growth boundaries if they're not going to serve their purpose of defining the future growth areas? So just that simple acknowledgement as a policy statement, it is our intent that we will not annex outside of those growth boundaries. The second goal relates to this continuation of this process, in a sense. You may recall that when Rob Merchant from Beaufort County talked about the Northern Beaufort County growth planning process with their multiple jurisdictions, they created a similar kind of structure. But one of the things that they did is that after we finished the plan, and we helped them with this Northern Regional Plan, after we finished the plan, they decided, you know what, this committee, very much like this committee, is important to continue as a forum for discussion about these things. So the idea that there might be, let's just pick a number, a quarterly process whereby you get back together right here in this room, just like this, and continue to discuss these kinds of issues. And in Beaufort County, it was interesting because there has been no shortage of issues to talk about, number one. Number two, they didn't have any formal agreement to do it. They just agreed that everybody agreed this was good to do. And maybe it's to talk about transportation planning. I know the mayor is interested in a potential development of a group devoted to solving the transportation issues and problems that you have. Maybe it's, I don't know, you can come up with any number of things that are potentially issues that affect everybody, and that a simple collaborative conversational communication facilitation, building relationships, that would benefit from that. That then also leads into this idea of a commitment that we're not going to wait another 20 years to revisit this. We're going to commit to revisit this in 5 years. And if you revisit this being the growth planning process, if you revisit it in 5 years and you do it every 5 years, then honestly, it's not as big a deal. It's when you wait 20 years that you have to start over. You have all new people at that point, right? So to simply agree that in 5 years, we're going to revisit this. And that really ended up setting a couple things as opportunities, one of which is Nolensville wanted to identify territory to consider to revisit in that 5-year period. So that's not part of the growth boundary, but it's just an informal kind of consideration of that. By the way, one thing I will tell you is I can show you the map if you want, but you may recall that Thompson Station then use that same mechanism, which is to identify the growth boundaries and then to identify areas, basically an area both on the east side and the west side of their growth areas, to be considered in the 5-year look back. I mentioned earlier that Thompson Station has been going through their comprehensive plan. So as part of that process, they are removing that 5-year revisit area from their map. I think, Micah, you can update if I'm not getting that right, but basically just considered that. You want to give a 10-second description of that?
So as part of our comprehensive planning process, we had kind of looked at land uses and transportation impacts for the urban growth boundary. And we've done our internal planning on that. So we know, if something happens in the interim after the growth plan is adopted, we've got our internal land use and transportation policies. But there's no need for that to be included in the growth plan. And we know we've heard from the people in Bethesda, especially, but also in Burwood with concerns. And so this was something that we could kind of hand out as an olive branch to the county areas, unincorporated areas, and say, well, we'll just remove that from any consideration.
And I think that's important movement. Commissioner Herbert has expressed concern about that in that Bethesda area in the past. So I can't speak for her, but hopefully that removes some of that concern. So anyway, that's happened, and then finally, Mayor Anderson had suggested that we include in consideration of this something that could be an agenda item for this group as it moves into this implementation committee format, is the idea of a multi-jurisdictional entity to focus on transportation. I don't think that idea is any more specific than that at this point. Just recognizing the need to do that. Mayor, do you want to say anything about that?
We started this process some last summer, and we had different changes that occurred with the State Department of Transportation. So we kind of put that on the back burner. I know many of you were in attendance to that. We're trying to identify where the main areas of transportation are needed. You would automatically think that I-65 north and south would be one of those areas, but out of that has come a lot of other discussions for that. We will try to get the group back together. The legislation, as you know, is on the Hill. The governor has come out with some additional funding, new leadership at TDOT, and so we're trying to get our arms around all of that and be sure that Williamson County is engaged in that. I know Ken talked about it this morning at our breakfast with the mayors, and trying to be sure that we're able to tie into what some of the governor's plans are, along with the other 94 counties in the state, everybody jockeying for position, because it gets down to money. But it's a long term, how do we address some of these things?
Yeah, and I don't have any specific knowledge of all those efforts. What I can tell you from other places that I've worked, you use the word jockeying for position. When you have counties jockeying for position, the extent to which you can come in with a unified position with all of the municipalities and the county signing on as a regional approach, I think that's just human nature. That's going to better prepare you for some community that's not as well organized. So I think that's all important. And you may recall that, Mike, it's been probably, 5 years ago now or so, that the county led a traffic study that looked at these issues and the funding shortfalls and all that. So the framework's out there, I think. So anyway, that's that. Okay. All right. Any questions so far? I'm going to shift at this point into the maps. But in terms of what I've said so far, any questions?
I think one of the things, I see Jason over here. Jason and I had a short conversation yesterday. And this is in regards to where do we put our schools. So if you look at the building permits for the last 24 months, and the settling of our schools, we have 48, 50 schools now, the two on the horizon, both of them kind of, well, not both of them, one of them out in the Triune, Noblesville area. Already we're seeing, when the county commission voted to go to 1 to 5 acres.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the building permits are very strong in the unincorporated area. Last year, there were about 25% of all the residential building permits occurred within the unincorporated area of our county. There's changes that are occurring, like in Spring Hill for the last, 5 or 6 months on the Williamson County side, not the Murray County side. I'm concerned about this, but I don't want to spend any money down there. But on the Williamson County side, Spring Hill, since August of last year, they've only had 1 month where they've had any residential building permits in Spring Hill. And when you think about that, you ask Joe to kind of dig into that and see, and that's how fast this can change within just 24 months. Yeah. Is it because they're all out of building permits? Is that will that affect schools? Where do we cite those schools? You look at Thompson Station, Noblesville, they're still continuing, particularly Noblesville still growing. Franklin has the lion's share of residential building permits with about 40, if I remember correctly, 45% of the total countywide. And Brentwood, because they're pretty much built out, they're doing what they want, and they're 1 acre lots, which is their model, which I think is great, but they're only doing about 3 to 4%. So it's sprinkled Fairview a little bit. And so I think all of that, we're at a perfect time to be evaluating and trying to figure out, because those schools cost a lot of money to build. I mean, a high school, $90 million, $100 million. I don't even know what a middle school is, 70 probably. And so we couldn't be at a better time to try to put our arms around. Now, we'll be looking at the word you used up there, school siting issues or sitting issues. I'm not sure which one that is.
Citing.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, that's going to change where we build these schools in the areas based upon these new urban growth boundaries we're trying to get to. And we can't afford to miss any of those at the cost of schools and the operational cost of schools. I just thought I'd throw that into everybody. You don't see those numbers that we see from the school side and how it affects all of our zoning, all of our growth areas, because if 45% of them are moving into Franklin, that throws a different dimension on where we put these schools. And then Nolensville, if you don't mind, Jason, just share with the group what you said about the growth in Nolensville, what's occurring over there.
Well, Nolensville continues to grow. We have a projected elementary school on the east side of our Nolensville Elementary, which is really the northeast corner of the county. Our next school after that is projected to be a middle school that will in part serve that area too. Our board did a rezoning out there this fall to take effect in the spring, and we still project, we have 3 elementary schools out there, we still project that 2 of those will be at or near capacity, even with the rezoning. So that area continues to grow. The Grassland area continues to be pretty flat. There are limits on how far we can transport students because of traffic and the state requirements for transportation time. So that's what we're seeing. Mayor, if I may, one of the comments I made to you is in the Spring Hill area, we're really watching June Lake. That's a 2,900 projected home development. I believe for our purposes, what happens there with the speed of the development and the demographics, the age of the buyers is going to be telling for us for the next, probably 10, 15 years. Is the price point going to be something that young families are moving in or not?
So listening to this, I hear 2 things. One of which is things are moving so fast that this idea of revisiting this every 5 years makes sense. 20 years is too long. And the second thing is you're going to have no shortage of things to talk about with a group like this over the long period. I mean, if you just put those 2 issues on the table, transportation and school siting, which is really all these issues. It's just talking about where should schools be planned for. And ideally, you plan your schools for locations where you're planning your growth as municipalities in the county. So I think that's just all the more reason why we should be thinking about this. And I see heads nodding. I think there's consensus on that. Anything else on those points? Yeah.
I would, because when I listened to what Rogers and Jason said, it gets to the first goal and the importance of the interlocal agreements that talk about, and I don't believe that's linear. It comes after we finalize, or the state finalizes the urban growth boundaries. Things are moving so quickly that there's those interlocal agreements and the policies that come with them, I would offer, need to start being discussed now. Because there's a lot of policy decisions to be made of what we do, some of which you mentioned. And I just throw that out, that those interlocal agreements and understanding based on where we are within the county are critical to managing how we grow.
I'm really glad you said that because just in the interest of transparency, we've talked about that issue. When you start getting down the path of intergovernmental agreements, then your various legal counsels need to be brought in. One of the things we talked about is whether we should do this, get this done first, and then deal with that, or do we try to multitask as we do this? We kind of decided more on the first because, frankly, we kind of have our hands full getting through this, right? So what we were hoping is let's keep our head down, let's get through this, get this plan adopted. Maybe, at some point when it leaves the county and goes to the state, then you turn your attention to that. But again, I'll be honest with you, we had that discussion. I think there is a strong sentiment that says we should be doing all this now, but we've just been focused on it so far. So let's hold that thought. We're going to talk about next steps at the end here, and maybe there's some guidance that you all can provide us on that. Okay, everything else? Want to look at some maps? And again, these maps, hopefully this is a refresher for a lot of you. These maps have not changed. I'm going to show you, this is the existing map. I'm going to show you the proposed map. I'm going to show you a highlight of what's being added and removed. And then I'm going to show you the one area that we do not yet have consensus on. But just on this existing map, I think you all are pretty well oriented. There's two terminologies or two acronyms. You should know the UGBs, that's the urban growth boundaries. Those are the ones around the municipalities. And then the planned growth areas are the area, that's the term the statute uses in unincorporated county where there are smaller focus areas, Leapers Fork being a good example of one of those. Okay, so that's the map. This is the proposed boundary. Let me just play the toggle game here. You can look at your community here. So I'm going to go back to existing, proposed. So you can see there are regionally, they don't look like huge changes, but they're all pretty important changes. More importantly, let me show you this map, which then highlights in on the what's being added and what's being removed. What's being added is in the blue crosshatched. What's being removed, or proposed to be removed, is in the red stripes. So you can see up in the northernmost corner, that large red area that is proposed to be removed. That's kind of that area that we're just talking about around Grassland. Through the comprehensive plan of the county, they concluded to remove that as a planned growth area in the county. And so that's substantially smaller. You can see over on the east area there, that's the Triune area, and you can see what had been a larger planned growth area has been cut substantially and reduced. A couple of other for the county that were added, like Arrington. Mike, what's that? Is that College Grove? Rudderville, thank you. Leapers Fork, which you know Leapers Fork, but Leapers Fork wasn't actually included as a planned growth area. So one of the things that all of those little planned growth areas have in common is that they've all been subject to a special area plan that the county's done. So that's part of that. I don't think I have to cover all this. You can see that Fairview is proposing to remove some area, add some area. Likewise, Franklin is removing some area on the western edge, but adding an area there. Thompson Station and Spring Hill, not surprisingly, aren't removing areas because they're more recent high growth areas. Nolensville is adding a little bit there. Brentwood is basically standing pat. Not surprising that they're largely built out. They're probably the older, more mature community in that sense. Lots of little kind of cleanup areas in here. So that is what it is. I'm going to show you the area that we haven't yet agreed on, but before I do that, I'm just let you stare at that for a bit. You've seen it before. All of these growth boundary changes have a report prepared by your community, prepared by your planners, with all of those growth forecasts and all of the analysis that's been done. I mean, there's a lot of work that back this up. Okay? Good? Move on? All right. Here we are. So the good news is we have agreement on over 99% of the county, right? And really, I say that seriously because when you look at all of the complexities, particularly along the interstate corridor here, all of these communities come together, and there were a lot of little detailed areas through the planners group process where it was like, okay, you guys need to get together and talk about that and work that one out and come back next time and so forth. And we it really was, it is pretty remarkable that right now it appears that at least at the planners group level and hopefully at your level, that you agree with these. And I should maybe take a picture. We're happy to send this out to everybody when we're finished here. But we have that one piece here that we're going to talk about. So the good news is we have 99+% agreement. The bad news is we have to have 100% agreement. The way the process works, everybody has to agree on all of this. Okay, so it's not like we can say, well, let's just park that one and move forward. So I do want to give you a little bit more description of what that area is. And then hopefully either Thompson Station and or Spring Hill can give us somewhat an update of where we stand on this. All right, so that map that I just showed you is right there. To orient you, that's I-65. The dark blue is current Spring Hill boundaries. The dark brown is current Thompson Station boundary. The light color, the light blue here, is the proposed addition to the Spring Hill growth boundary. And the light color here is the proposed addition to the Thompson Station growth boundary. And then this area here, generally speaking, is the area that we're talking about. And I want to be careful. That map looks really specific. That's not an official map. That was our map that we drew based on what we understood to be the area that we're talking about. So there's a couple of really important pieces to understand here. You've all heard about the new interchange that's actually now under construction on I-65. Somebody mentioned earlier the development. What was June Lake? That's the area that's referred to as June Lake. That is the Buckner Road, I guess what's called the Buckner Road extension. Is that the right terminology? What is that now? June Lake Boulevard, okay. Because that's Buckner Road, where Buckner Road ends right there, okay. And that is proposed to be a road that extends all the way over to Lewisburg Pike at that point. Facts all correct there? Okay. This area, so I think, you know, when we use the term, when we show the map, I think it's pretty self-evident that these are the boundaries that are in question. Where the question is up here, you know, we drew the line just to capture that, but you know, that I don't really have as clear understanding of that. That line may be a little fuzzy in terms of what the disputed area is. So that's where we stand. Is there? We know that there have been conversations about this. The mayor has convened, I think, a couple of rounds of meetings to try to facilitate this. I know those are ongoing. We, based on just what we're hearing, we're optimistic that something is going to be worked out. Maybe that's because we know something has to be worked out if this process is going to go forward. So is there, and I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot. If you have an update, I'm sure everybody would like to hear it. Otherwise, I think what we are hoping to see, want to see happen is conversations continue to try to get that last 0.5% of the county down. Anyway, I'm looking at Thompson Station and Spring Hill to see if there's any kind of update that y'all want to provide.
Just to kind of get together, and I appreciate you putting this map together, Gray. That was kind of helpful, and kind of seeing where the areas actually are. And so I think the intent is to get together and kind of work in a collaborative spirit and try to resolve this so the process can move forward.
Is that the intent?
We're open to doing the same.
Good. All right, well, the whole process rides on y'all, so don't feel any pressure to get this worked out there, okay?
It would be Spring Hill compensation.
Well, you know, so that's an interesting comment, Micah, because in some ways, when you look at this at a countywide level, that's not especially surprising in that is the area where the growth pressures are now, right? So,
if I might, through the mayor, we've been talking to both of the cities trying to find a solution here. And we haven't gotten there yet. Both sides have continued to talk. We'll continue to talk with them over the next couple of weeks to see if we can get there. But so far, everybody's been open to the discussion. I don't think it probably serves much purpose to get into many details of that in this meeting. But we'll nose to the grindstone. We're continuing on in the process.
And honestly, I just as soon leave it right there because you said what I wanted you to say, which is we're going to continue to work on it, right? I mean, the commitment by both communities to resolve it. And again, let's pat ourselves on the back that we got 99.5% of the way there. We're on the 1 yard line, and there's no such thing as a field goal, right? So we have to punch it in. So that was a Bengals kind of thing. Sorry. Okay. Good with that. I'm going to move on to the next topic. All right. So we have a new development at the General Assembly level. A bill has been filed. Christy, I know you've been looking at that one. Can you give folks an update on what that's all about?
I'll just stay here and talk loudly. If that's okay.
Is there? I think there's one microphone that works, isn't there?
You're gonna make me use that.
Yeah. It doesn't amplify you.
It kind of does. Thanks, Vernon.
Oh, it does, doesn't it?
Well, you all probably know all this, but there's a bill in the General Assembly. It's House Bill 28, Senate Bill 75. It's not had much movement since the end of January, and we'll talk about that in a minute. First of all, it basically takes the growth plan law and just kind of wipes it off the books. Anything related to Title 6, Chapter 58 is just gone. And then pretty much any other place in the code where it says urban growth boundary or planned growth area or rural area as it relates to the growth plan, just kind of deletes it. So it involves a whole lot of different chapters and sections of the code. It's my understanding that while it's not dead, it's not moving right now, with the intent of, hey, we filed this to see what everybody thought and to talk about it. And if there are suggestions on what you want to do with it, let us know. So I guess part of the reason we want to put this on the agenda today is if there is some sort of consensus from Williamson County as a whole about our thoughts on this legislation, it would be more powerful to share that collectively. If not, totally cool with that. We'll look at it from a county standpoint. You guys can look at it from a municipality standpoint. But especially given where we are in this process, if the whole law goes away, there are opportunities to continue with this process, but it would look differently. And so, because just like we talked about before, and Greg can say this earlier, what he said earlier, the Beaufort County person, they did all their planning and growth advisory groups completely on their own without any sort of state enabling legislation. So it's still something that we care about, we can continue on with, but the process for doing so will adjust significantly without the boundaries that are in the code for the growth plan. So I just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention to see what what municipalities were thinking about it, because it obviously affects you all significantly in the annexation law piece. We don't have to really necessarily worry about it at the county level, but the growth plan encouraged the communities to work together, and we're working together trying to amend it. And then if the whole book is deleted, what do we do then? So that's just kind of what I was thinking we would try and talk about some today and get some thoughts and discussion.
Yeah, and while you're thinking about that, because I think it would be helpful just to hear comments. When I first heard this, and we were first talking about it, the first reaction was, well, that's a game changer. But then I was thinking, you know what? Maybe it doesn't have to be a game changer one way or the other. I would make the argument. Remember, you have growth boundaries now, and you didn't have to come together to do this. You came together because you thought it was important to do it. So going back to Beaufort County and even Wake County, and lots of other places where we've worked on growth boundaries, this is the first community where we've worked on growth boundaries because the state law says you have to, right? In other communities, it's just perceived as being good planning. I would make the argument that even if right now that law went away, you all should just stay the course. Now, you could even make the argument, hey, that saves us from a series of bureaucratic steps that we don't have to take now, which is to get it to the state for review. But there's nothing to keep you from doing exactly what we're doing here and following up with intergovernmental agreements and everything we're talking about here, whether the state law is there or not. And I think that's important. I spent some time over the last couple of days just driving around again. Every time I drive around here, and it's just incredible how much pressure you have and the traffic that you have from when I worked here 20 years ago. You need to be doing this. This is the planner, not the facilitator talking. You need to be doing this whether the state law requires it or not, I think. So what do y'all think about that? And some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this. Eric?
I don't disagree that we would keep doing this, but by the same token, the power of state law to support this type of planning is extremely valuable, because you can see where resistance might come from our ability to do this kind of work, especially if it's been undercut by the state removing the whole thing. So we strongly oppose it. I know Tennessee Municipal League strongly opposes this action. 3 of us, Franklin, Brentwood, and Spring Hill, all work with the same lobbyist group. We were talking with them just yesterday, and this is a top tier priority for about 11 cities across the state that are kind of similar in size, city manager cities. So it is on our radar screen for sure, and we ought to strongly oppose it because it undercuts the good work we're trying to do. Doesn't mean we wouldn't stop doing it because it's the right thing to do, but boy, it would be a blow, to be honest, and we need to push back on it, because good planning ought to be supported by our state. With the growth that we're seeing and the issues people complain about don't get better if you do less planning.
Right.
Right? It's not that hard. And the things people complain about would be significantly worse without the planning we do.
So am I understanding correctly, Eric, that based on what we know right now, at least 3 of the communities already have taken a position in opposition to this happening? So that you said that was y'all, Brentwood and Spring Hill?
Yeah, we work along with 11 other cities in the state, or a total of 11 of us, with the same lobbyist group, and this is one of our top tier priorities legislatively.
Have the other 3 municipalities looked at this? Thompson Station, Fairview, and Nolensville? Have you all looked at this?
Yes, I mean, obviously, echo everything that Eric said.
Okay. What about, where's our Fairview?
We hadn't looked at it too much, but I agree.
Okay. And then Nolensville, probably in the same position, I guess, right?
We haven't looked at it and gotten involved like the other 3 cities have. We support that position.
In the county, obviously. Yeah. All right. So, okay. So then the question is whether or not this is an informal advisory group, but it still has a voice, whether or not this as an advisory group representing all those jurisdictions. I mean, frankly, if part of the message went, I'm over my head here in terms of state politics, but I'm thinking if the message went to the legislature that, hey, Williamson County, one of the fastest growing communities in the state, is working on this, or right in the middle of it, this would really pull the rug out from under them if that adds to the individual jurisdictions promoting that. Yes? Okay, then the question is, how do we do that? I mean, we're not really we're an advisory group, but I don't know. What do y'all think? What would be? Do you agree? Do you agree that in addition to what your individual communities are doing, and some of you working with other communities already, that a voice coming out of this process would be helpful? Do we agree with that?
I think it would have to be a joint resolution among all of our elected officials.
Yeah, the elected bodies could weigh in.
Okay, so it's not, okay, that's a good, so, whereas clauses could include that we're all working together, all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. But if it were a joint resolution, that it's not this group communicating it, it's the jurisdictions together communicating that we're working on this process.
Eric, if I could ask, since you brought it up, do you think this bill has legs? Now, it's got 2 powerful people supporting it. Does it have legs?
Well, right now it's kind of in a holding pattern, so we don't know for sure, but Bill Watson, who's the Senate sponsor, played a pretty big role in some of the annexation changes we saw. 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I think it needs to be taken very seriously.
Okay. So I'm not going to solve this standing here in front of you. It seems like there should be some follow-up effort to explore this idea of some sort of joint communication or resolution. Is that something that the attorneys should be talking about together, you think?
Well, I think the real question is whether it's going to be some joint communication from the mayors or if it's going to be from the legislative bodies of the entities, because the latter is obviously more complicated to get it through each of the legislative bodies in any kind of timely fashion. For example, the filing deadline for the county was yesterday for its March meeting. They don't have an April meeting, so if it was objected to, you'd be in May. Now, I don't think that would preclude the mayors from putting a joint communication together saying, as the mayor of these entities, these are our concerns and why we would oppose it. But I don't think they can speak on behalf of the legislative bodies unless we go through those.
We don't have we meet in 2 more weeks, so we get totally do it. Yeah, we meet every 2 weeks, so we can do it.
Well, okay.
So, I'm sorry, so when you say joint communication between the mayors, does that mean a resolution or just the mayors themselves? Because Spring Hill, we will sign a piece of joint communication with any mayors in an hour. If it has to be a resolution, we have to take it to the board, and we will put that on our next agenda, which is in 6 days. And I assume, I can't promise, but I assume that will pass easy. But I don't know how often you all have your next meeting, when this is actually due to go, somebody to lock it up or email it up to the state.
If the mayors are in agreement, I think we could just do a letter like we did with some of the requests we made during the pandemic for extensions of executive orders and things, and we circulated them and all the mayors signed off. We could certainly do something like that quicker and more efficiently than trying to go through legislative bodies. I'm not saying don't do that if you want to do that, but I just think that it's going to be more complicated to put those pieces together to have a joint resolution for the legislative bodies. And I don't know that it adds much from the legislative standpoint to what the mayors can do individually or sign off on a joint letter would be, I think that might be the way to go.
So if the effect of those options are the results the same, let's do it the quickest way. That's my 2 cents.
I think they would largely be the same.
Well, so to touch on that, I agree with you, Mayor, but you're elected, Ken's elected. I'm trying to think, you're elected. We have 2 mayors though that are not elected, and so they're much more reluctant to sign on to something like that without their full body. And that being, I think I've got this right, Brentwood and Noblesville are non-elected mayors, is that correct?
Correct. In our case, what I would do probably is, because I think our board would be supportive, is I would just informally poll them to make sure that there's not a majority of them that don't have an opposition to the mayor signing on to such a letter.
So maybe that's the way to do it, is let somebody draft the letter. If you can do that, Christie, and then let's get it out.
I'll just point to Christie.
Christie, and then we can get it to the 2 non-elected mayors along with the elected mayors and get this off dead center. If all of the mayors that are here, there's 3 or 4 here today, I will definitely sign on that. But we've already told our lobbyists, this is our position.
Well, I can draft something and send it around to all the legal counsel because we have an email chain for their comment and review and suggestion, and then share it with you all to get to the final versions.
Brian, I'm putting you on the spot. Are you okay with it, or you want to not? Hands for it. It's right.
All right. See how important this group is already. Okay, let me move on here, and we're just about finished. So we are working with the assumption that this final map issue is going to get resolved in whatever timing it takes to resolve it. We do not plan to bring you back together as an advisory group just on that issue, right? So I think what we will be working on is a game plan for how this goes forward from this point. So let's assume that everything gets worked out and we are ready then to move into the formal process as set out under state law. There's a number of timing things that have to be hit. There are public meetings that have to be held. And so we need to basically, and we'll work with the planners group on this, is just to game plan it, sequence it out, what happens when, and what that all looks like. You know, you can see the basic steps here with the 3 points here of the coordinating committee, approval by legislative bodies, and then public hearings. There'll be a whole game plan associated with that. Then I think you all know that it goes to the state, and the actual mechanism that it goes to is what's called the Local Government Planning Advisory Committee, which I think is basically a group of planners from around the state, right?
So there's some mayors.
Some mayors, okay, because Mike actually sat on that group for a while, right? And then this goes back to, let me put back on the table the comment that was made earlier about the intergovernmental agreements. I started to say, and then we work on the intergovernmental agreements, but you know, I think the idea of starting that discussion it's possible. I mean, it's just a question for you all to advise on, I think, and that is, so here's the question: do we focus on getting this part of it done? Right. Let's keep our tables clear. Let's not mix other things into it. Let's work on getting this done, and then visit the issue of implementation, intergovernmental agreements, continuation of the group, or do we try to multitask it and do them both? I mean, that's the question that we've always talked about, and with the planners group. So the comment was made earlier, let's get working on it, and I wanted to respect that idea. What do y'all think about that? Go ahead, Emily.
Well, I think it depends on the timeline to me of how long we're really talking about holding off before officially convening the coordinating committee. As Vernon said, we have some needs to kind of look at some of the interlocal agreements, specifically in regards to probably the county zoning and the wastewater kind of treatment, and how, where or if we allow or not or prohibit alternative wastewater systems within the UGB that's outside the city limits. And we do need to make some progress on some of those things, I think, as quickly as we can, knowing it's going to be a process. But if we're looking at not convening the official coordinating committee for many, many, many more months, that puts then that step much farther back even than from that. So I think it depends. If the coordinating committee, if we're really talking about doing that relatively soon, maybe it could be, you know, one step then the next step. But otherwise, we might want to start looking at both at the same timetable.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Once you pull the trigger, whatever that mechanism is in terms of establishing the coordinating committee that's set out in statute, then it needs to move pretty fast because there's time limits in the statute. I mean, there's certain pretty tight deadlines. That's why we went through this advisory committee process, advisory group process, because once that clock starts running, then it is moving along pretty quick. On the other hand, I mean, our last meeting was in mid-September, and so here we still are. And we don't know with this remaining issue. So what I'm wondering is if, and I'm going to put Spring Hill and Thompson Station on the hot seat here in a sense, if we can commit to some kind of time frame within which to try to get this done. You know, here we are, March 1st. Is it reasonable to say, you know how scheduling meetings are. I mean, if you schedule meetings and it's like, okay, well, we're not going to be able to meet for a month. But if we put some pressure on ourselves just from a timing perspective on this. Is that reasonable to think about? Thompson Station and Spring Hill?
Greg, while you're putting the heat on them, I would add, we're in the middle of our update of our land use plan in Vision Franklin. And so we're just talking a little bit here. Having these move together would actually be really helpful to us. So I'd hate to see us tread water for another year on this thing while we're trying to put some pieces in place. And to have this be a companion would actually be great for what we're doing. So I think there's a lot to benefit to keep this moving. And as Emily said, we can do some of this work in parallel. You know, I think there's a real benefit to that. But I also respect that you guys are working through something. If we can give you a helpful deadline, I'd be glad to do it.
That's it, a helpful deadline. What does that look like? I mean, just again, all we're saying is commit to try to get this resolved faster rather than just let it, linger. And that's best with the deadline. So a month? 2 weeks? This afternoon?
A month or so. I mean, I think that's.
All right, we're starting March. You're right. Tomorrow? Today? Tomorrow's March. All right, let's keep a round number. March. You're going to march forward with solving this problem. Come on, that was a dad joke. Okay, that's good. Let's do that, and then we'll revisit. Emily's point. We'll revisit at that point. What the timing is. Okay. I think that's all I have. Planners group, did I miss anything? We just had our call earlier last week. So did we cover everything we need to cover? All right. So you'll next, like I said, we're not going to bring you back in here just to resolve this issue. By the time we come back together, and hopefully it's with that month, then soon after that. So we'd be meeting in early April would be the intent to come back to you with a game plan for moving this forward through the formal process. Any final comments? Barron?
No, thanks to everyone. I know it's difficult. We're making progress, sometimes a little slower than we like, but thank you very much for hanging in there with us. And thanks to you, Greg, for coming in and doing this and kind of facilitating our needs.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thanks, guys.